this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and this is Midday with Reverend Don. And welcome. Today is the beginning of a new week and the final week of February. And today my subject is the great Goddess Caffeina and other tutelary deities. And I hope you're having a lovely day. And before I get on to my subject, I wanted to talk about my current project. I was up late last night editing Reverend Don's book of astrology. It's very close to being finished, and it has taken it's taken a little while, and I believe we are slightly raising the price as we go forward. And one of the reasons is that I counted the table of contents, and there are 263 entries in the table of contents. That will tell you how many things are in this book. So it's going to be quite a good examination of astrology. So I know a number of people have already pre-ordered it. If you're interested, you can find it at CorellianPublishing.com, along with many other interesting books. Today, well, you see, I have my coffee, as I pretty much always do. And that kind of inspired me to speak about the goddess Caffeina. Caffeina is the goddess of caffeinated substances, coffee, tea, chocolate, etc. And if it has caffeine, Caffeina is one of the patron deities associated with it. And hello to Victoria in the chat room. It's good to see you, Victoria. Caffeina is very much a modern deity, and a deity that is very close to my heart. And hello to Antonio in the chat room. She's one of a number of modern deities associated with either coffee or caffeination. And hello to Steve in the chat room. It's good to see you. And hello to Renee. So I thought I would talk about, in association with the goddess Caffeina, the idea of tutelary deities, because Caffeina is a tutelary deity. She's a deity of this particular subject. Oh, and Victoria says, it's truly uplifting to see you today. Thank you, Victoria. That's very kind of you to say. You know, my friend Sir Edward is also known as the coffee pusher, Ed the Pagan. And this is a true fact of life. And one of the things it means is I see many coffee memes on my internet feed that often bring Caffeina to mind. And I have met a woman who claims to have invented the goddess Caffeina, also the goddess Asphalta, and was utterly shocked to find that people take them seriously when they were only meant to be a joke. And what do I say to this? Because I do, in fact, take both of those goddesses very seriously and have had great work in association with them, particularly the goddess Asphalta in terms of travel and parking in downtown Chicago. I found invoking her to be very effective. And my answer to that is that in the nature of history and humankind, new deities come into people's perception constantly. And hello to Mary in the chat room. And this has always been the case. And, you know, if you're an animist, which many of us are, I consider myself an animist, you believe that everything is alive. And you believe that, well, at least as I understand animism, you believe that the higher self of everything is part of the divine. It is divine in its own right, and it's part of the collective divine. So the idea that something like coffee or our roadway system or a particular skill or art should have a tutelary deity, a divine aspect to itself, actually makes perfect sense, and you see it throughout the history of pagan religions. And hello to Tom in the chat room. If you want a more historic example of this sort of tutelary deity, I would point to the goddess Sesheta ancient Egypt, who was the goddess of writing and scribecraft. She was eventually considered the consort of the god Thoth, and in many ways it was a female equivalent to certain aspects of Thoth as patron of writing and of scribes. And hello to Janet in the chat room. And Janet says, "Good day to you, Lord Don. Enjoy your coffee. Thank you." Um, Obviously, the goddess Sasheta was the patron of a certain human activity, and presumably could not have predated that activity, at least not in that form. But the activity itself was considered to be an expression of the divine, and so naturally it had a deity. If you look at all the different arts and sciences, you will find times, including in Christian Europe, where they were portrayed as deities and taken quite seriously in that sense. If you look at the muses from ancient Greek mythology, you will see that every one of them is a different art form. Um, we have Erato, the goddess of romantic and erotic writing. We have Clio, the goddess of history writing. We have Polyhymnia, the goddess of liturgical writing and singing, and so through all of the different muses. So the idea of having a deity in this form is nothing new or unusual in pagan religion. But there are some people who, for some reason, find it odd or even upsetting that we would have, for example, a goddess Caffeina, a goddess Asphalta. Hello to Christine in the chat room. I've heard people talk about the goddess Computa, who is the goddess of computers. And to me, this all makes perfect sense. Nor are they necessarily the only deity that you could attach to these different things. Many people would think of computers as being under, for example, Mercury or Athena or um, various other deities, or Sasheta, whom I already mentioned, or Thoth. And all of these are entirely reasonable assumptions, reasonable um, conditions to move forward with for different people who see it in different ways. To me, a goddess like Asphalta only makes perfect sense in the modern world, where our roadways are so important to us, certainly cover more space than any previous civilization's roadways ever did, and we spend more time on them, I think, than um, most previous civilizations spent in travel. Hello to Lynn in the chat room. It's good to see you. Naturally, there should be a goddess associated with this phenomenon, who, to me, as fault, is also a protector during travel. If you are traveling on the roadways, and in that, she is only the most modern form of many deities who have been protectors of travelers. Um, Mercury is one. Saint Christopher is another. Um, Epona had that aspect. Hello to Joanne in the chat room. It's good to see you, Joanne. The idea of a deity who protects travelers is a very ancient idea. Um, Asphalt is a perfectly good example of it. Now, a goddess who helps you to find a parking place, that's more modern. But if we look at Epona, in her Roman sense, not her Celtic sense, where she was presumably more of a mother goddess, like other horse goddesses in Celtic religion. But in the Roman sense, she became a patroness of travelers and also retained her connection to horses and was a patroness of horses, who were the cars of the time. So the idea that you would have a deity in these roles is very traditional. There's nothing odd about it. And the fact that it's a deity recently realized does not, in my opinion, detract from it in any way. If we look again at the Roman Epona, she was viewed very differently from the original Celtic Epona. Um, If we look at a number of deities over time, they go through vast changes in how people perceive them and interact with them. One of the best examples might be the goddess Isis. Um, I'm a member of the Fellowship of Isis. I'm actually an archpriest of Isis, along with many other things I've done in my life, and a member of the Triad Union. But if we look at the goddess Isis, everybody will tell you she was the daughter of Nut and Geb. She was the wife of Osiris and the sister of Set and the mother of Horus. And all that's true in late period Egypt. And hello to Lafayette, Lafayette Street Media in the chat room. It's good to see you. And hello to Joanne in the chat room. If I didn't already get you, it's good to see you. Um, but when Isis first appeared, she was a totally separate, independent goddess, not associated with these other figures. She was the goddess of the throne and of sovereignty, and various things that connect to this. Only over time did she become associated with Osiris and Horus separately. This is why, if you look at ancient Egyptian religion, you'll see that Isis is frequently remarked as the mother of Horus, but there are other goddesses given that same appellation. Hathor is often described as the wife of Horus, but you go back a little farther, she was the mother of Horus, which, considering that Hathor is the sky and Horus is the sun, in one sense, makes perfect sense. Um, you can see a lot of change in these very ancient deities versus where they began and where they ended up. So the idea that a deity would change in how people perceive and interact with it, the idea um, that a deity might take a new name, or there might be a totally new deity, is completely traditional in pagan religion. And hello to Victoria in the chat room. Victoria says, I love Isis. And Isis probably is the most popular Western goddess historically at all periods, I think. Well, most periods. Certainly one of the most popular Western goddesses in North Africa and throughout Europe, um, in varying places at varying times. She has been worshipped more or less continually since very early dynastic Egypt. And she is one of those goddesses who didn't really go out of fashion during the Christian era. She was viewed a little differently by people who were dealing with her, but she still continued in alchemy and hermeticism and various other places among people who didn't necessarily think of themselves as non-Christians, although some of them did. But they had a place for Isis in many cases. Um, this is an example of a very long-term goddess who's viewed in very different ways in different times. Hecate is another very good example. Another deity who continued to be brought up throughout the Christian era. And Victoria says, I'm a Welsh Celt myself here in Wales. That's lovely, Victoria. Um, Wales is a beautiful country, and I would love to pay it a visit one day. But Hecate, people will argue endlessly over how they feel this goddess should be viewed based on certain times in history. But the truth is, she's been viewed in very different ways throughout her very long history, um, ranging from a maiden to a crone. Um, and people will say, well, the ancient Greeks didn't see her as a crone. Well, no, they didn't. But she continued to be a figure throughout the medieval and modern era. And that's when people started to perceive her in a more crone-like state. Um, and this is a perfectly natural development of a goddess. In Alexandria, she is perceived as basically the nous, the world soul, and she has taken so many different forms historically. And the idea that only one of those uh, is appropriate is kind of like those Christians who will tell you that only their one little church with 30 members are actually Christian, and all the other Christians who ever lived were not. Um, it doesn't make any more sense than that. All of these different forms have their value, their reason for being, or they would not have been. So my message is worship the gods as they come to you, and take them as they give themselves. And Caffeina speaks to many of us. And was there a goddess Caffeina in anyone's mind 100 years ago? Not that I know of. Um, although I might be surprised. But is she a fairly serious deity for many people now? Absolutely. The same with Asphalta. And um, then you got things like the spaghetti monster. And the spaghetti monster absolutely started out as a joke, but I am fairly sure there are people who don't perceive it that way at all, who do in fact perceive it as their way of understanding the divine. And there are so many different people with so many different needs that we need many different ways of understanding the divine, because one form isn't going to speak to us all. And hello to, or I believe I already said hello to Mary in the chat room, but Mary says, yes, hail Caffeina, hail Caffeina. I was not a great appreciator of coffee when I was younger, and that has mostly to do with the ways in which I tasted it. And I tasted coffee for the first time in childhood, but my parents liked their coffee. My father liked sugar in his coffee. My mother liked cream in her coffee, and never the two met um, in their household. And consequently, I wasn't particularly given to coffee as a young person, even though I was always allowed to try it and did on a number of occasions. But I was also told very early on, your taste will change as you age. I remember in my 20s trying coffee again, and it was black coffee, and it was okay. And then I met Ed the Pagan, the coffee pusher, and he introduced me to coffee with all the works, with the cream and the sugar, and sometimes with the flavoring, and I was a goner. Um, and I have been a coffee addict ever since. I have at least several cups a day, most days. Although there are days I don't have it, and I don't find myself negatively impacted by that. Um, but yes, I've been on a long coffee journey ever since, about 30 years now. You know, someone once said to Voltaire, the great philosopher, that seeing him drinking coffee, they said, you should stop that. Coffee is a slow killer. And Voltaire responded to them, you must be right, because I'm 80 years old and I'm not dead yet. Um, or actually, I've been drinking it for 80 years and I'm not dead yet. Um, so yeah, if it's a killer, it's a very slow killer. And hello to April in the chat room. And April says, sorry, I'm a bit late, but I like coffee too, very strong. And one of the wonderful things about coffee is you can have it in so many ways, and so many varieties out there. I know people who like their coffee very strong. I know people who like um, Near Eastern or Middle Eastern coffee, which is very strong. And I know people who like their coffee very light, um, who like their cafe au lait. And I'm a little bit more on that side myself. And if I were a personal fan of the stronger coffee, I'd probably drink less of it. Um, but I find that I like my coffee. I don't think you. Oh, you can see it. I like my coffee a nice little medium strength, because I'll be drinking it for several hours, maybe all day. And and Joanne says even in baths. And this is true. There are people who use coffee and in various ways in their bathing habits. I often use a particular soap that makes a big deal out of having coffee as part of its ingredients, and it's supposedly very invigorating. And I feel invigorated when I use it, but I have no idea if that's simply because it says coffee on the label. Uh, but it might be entirely true. Um, and since I feel the effect of it either way, I do like that kind of soap. There are all kinds of things you can do with coffee. Coffee can be very useful in gardening, coffee grounds. And you know who really likes coffee? Earthworms. Um, it is a wonderful food for earthworms. So if you don't know what to do with your coffee grounds, your earthworms will love them. And hello to Nicholas in the chat room. It's good to see you, Nicholas. And Joanne points out it's good for exfoliation. Yes, I've seen a number of particularly handmade soaps that include coffee for exactly that reason, for exfoliation. And I'm sure there are many ways to use it for that and many, many other beauty processes. So the Goddess Caffeina has a very wide range. It's not only things we eat or drink, but also it, caffeine has a presence in many other things we work with. So I'm a great fan of caffeina. I've done many artworks of caffeina. And Renee says coffee is great in cooking, especially meats. Absolutely, it can be good in a number of sauces as well. And I recently saw it used as a cake ingredient, um, and not necessarily in the way I would have thought, but it was very interesting. I do watch a lot of food porn, um, and I quite enjoy seeing the unusual recipes and the ways to use things that you wouldn't necessarily think of. Janet says, I used to drink coffee all day, but since I've been treated for fibro, I had to cut back a little. You have my sympathy. I used to drink more than I drink now. I found at a certain point in my early 30s or my late 20s, I don't remember exactly when, but I found I had gotten up to 2 pots a day. That was bad for me. I cut back down from that and try not to go over one at most. Um, Christine says, yummy chocolate covered coffee beans. Absolutely. And Nicholas says, coffee cake is awesome. Absolutely. Um, I also, for most of my life, I could drink coffee right up until bedtime. It wouldn't keep me awake. I did not have that reaction to it. And then I hit a certain age. And now coffee will keep me up if I have it too late in the day, which is sometimes why I have it late in the day. I mentioned that I was working on editing the book of astrology last night, which is very near completion and well ahead of schedule, which is like very, very unusual for me, but there we are. And totaling up the 263 entries in the table of contents was part of that. But to be able to do that till 2 this morning, I was drinking my coffee, um, and it was very helpful. And then I watched the movie I said yesterday I was thinking I would watch, The Return of Philo Vance. What a horrible movie. It was a B movie at best in its day. Um, and Christine says, I think more clearly after drinking coffee. That's kind of how I feel about it. I think I'm a little more alert. I think a little more clearly. I wake up faster, and or wake back up if I need to. I find it to be a good stimulant that, if it has any negative effects on me, I don't see them, and I quite enjoy it. But going back to the return of Philo Vance for a moment, it did have one very interesting aspect, and that is that one of the major co-stars in the film was Clara Bendick, I believe is her actual name, but she played Auntie M in The Wizard of Oz. And in this movie, She was the grandmother of one of the early murder victims and a major character in her own right. It was very interesting to see her in such a prominent role. About 10 years after The Wizard of Oz was made, I want to say about 15 years before she died. So she would have been about 70, I think, when she made this part, and it was very interesting. So in that sense, I'm glad I watched it, and I will say, for what appears to have been a B movie, certainly nothing story-wise to write home about. But the costuming was really, really of a better quality than I would have expected. Um, if it was made in the 1940s, which was later than I expected, and beautifully put together, um, well beyond the quality of the script. So I found it very interesting in that sense. Um, but as an actual movie as such, I'm glad I saw it, but I don't think I'll go out of my way to watch it again. And this kind of speaks to what I was saying about Philo Vance, and in a way speaks to our subject today. Philo Vance was hugely popular in the 1920s, still a little bit in the 1930s, and then kind of became a low rent detective character, and then dropped out of most people's um, experience altogether. And that that's something that we see historically when we look at different deities. They will have periods when they become very popular, and then some of them become less popular. Some are totally forgotten about. Sometimes they become popular again. And when that happens, it's often in a different interpretation than the original. Um, and all of them go through constant development, just as we do ourselves. Um, and this is something very important for um, understanding the idea of deities. The Christian idea of deity is kind of like a fly in amber, never changes, never develops, even if in reality that's not exactly true. But as they perceive it, um, deity is just what deity is, and cannot have ever possibly changed. But that is not certainly a realistic way of looking at our pagan deities. They constantly change and grow and develop, and not unlike the soul itself, they split at certain points. And Lafayette Street Media says this also reminds me of comic book characters. Yeah, they go through similar evolutions, and these actually, in their way, are a very realistic portrayal of life in an unrealistic form, but in terms of the actual forces and certainly of our understandings of life. They constantly grow, they constantly evolve, they do not remain the same. So when we talk again about Caffeina or Asphalta, um, or any modern understanding of deity that does not have a traditional form, there's nothing new about it. Um, we see it repeatedly historically. They're not always the deities we think of, but if you look at ancient Rome, there's a famous example of how if a Roman was hanging a new door to their home, they would be invoking the deity of the door, the deity of the door frame, the deity of the threshold, and they absolutely believed all of these things had their deity, their spirit. That's animism. And doors obviously had no deity before we had doors. Um, and so deity is a constantly evolving thing. Our way of understanding deity is a constantly evolving thing. Everything in the universe is constantly evolving. And I think that is one of the great secrets of the universe. So I want to thank you for joining me today. And I hope that you will enjoy the presence of Caffeina in your life if she's in your life. And whether through tea or coffee or chocolate or any of her other children. And tomorrow we're going to have a best of, and then I will be back on Thursday to talk more about Corellian publishing with Chris Copeland, and probably quite a bit more about the Book of Astrology, um, which again is right on the edge of completion, and also other new things coming from Corellian publishing. So have a lovely Monday, and let us close with our prayer as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and thanks for all that you do for us in our lives. We rejoice in your presence, and we ask you to help to keep our minds plastic and open to the evolution of ways of thinking and perceiving the universe. Help us to continue to grow as long as we live. Help us to expand our understandings and to realize just how broad, just how versatile, just how remarkable this universe is that we are in. And let us not lose sight of the wonders that surround us everywhere. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you, knowing you're always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And we will see you